Rob pulled the seat upright. He took several deep breaths. He caught a whiff of his own morning breath. He would take care of that with some mints later. He yawned and stretched. Even though he hadn't gotten a full 8 hours of sleep, he had slept deeply, and he felt rested. Despite the way he woke up, a way he was becoming quite used to, he felt optimistic about being up so early. He needed a lot of hours to get things done, and he would have them. He couldn't wait to get some coffee and maybe a croissant at a fast food joint. He hadn't had coffee at that early an hour in the morning in what felt like so long. He couldn't wait to drink it in the hours a normal person was supposed to have it. He hoped he would feel nostalgic about when he used to get up for work and have a mundane day. He wished he could time travel and visit himself on one of the more stressful days he'd had and say, "Don't sweat this. Enjoy it. It's going to get a hell of a lot harder." He knew he wouldn't have to look for fast food. It always had a way of popping up on its own. He looked at the directions the cashier at the gas station had given him the night before. They were simple, and he was still on track. He followed them from memory while driving. There were only a couple of turns. He saw the shopping plaza up ahead as promised. It looked mammoth in the desolate, flat area. The orange morning light glinted off the arch above its sign. Sunlight was glinting off another set of arches across the street, golden ones. There was a McDonald's next to the health food store. It was open. Rob pulled into its lot and could smell the food and the coffee even with the windows rolled up. It was chilly. It was only early September, but Rob could feel the seasons change in the air. The month's changeover. That reminded him of his rent. For a moment he had a quick adrenaline rush. Then he remembered that he had dropped the check in the slot early, since he might be staying at Sue's past the 1st. He had deposited the money to cover it. The rent was taken care of, for the next 4 weeks at least. He giggled a little too heartily at himself for worrying about something so comparably trivial. He had felt his old neurotic self for a second there. He didn't need to time travel at all. He was still right there with himself. He hoped he still would be after the day was over. It was still too early to use the shopping center. They would probably open in an hour or two. He could kill some time getting some breakfast. It would feel like a 3-course meal after what he'd had the night before. He went in to order. There were only 2 other customers there. One of them looked homeless. Rob ordered the largest combo meal he could get. It had eggs and bacon and sausage with mini pancakes and a hash brown patty. He got the coffee supersized. He poured his maple syrup-flavored packets all over the styrofoam tray. He took his time eating it all, relishing how hot it was. Before too long, he saw the metal security gates on the plaza be rolled up by a couple of workers. He wasn't too excited. He had gotten so much of what he needed the night before at the convenience store. He took his shopping list out of his pocket. He had already knocked out all the easy-to-get items. All that was left was foxglove tea, ground ivy, powdered slippery elm bark, and stinging nettles. He wandered over to the plaza and went into the Albertsons grocery store section. The other sections of the center were for an optometrist, a dentist, flowers, and a Starbucks. They were sure to be of no help. It turned out the Albertsons was of no help either. They had all the items he had bought the night before, except for the flare gun and the hunting knife. When a bag boy asked him if he needed any help, Rob had asked him if they had any powdered slippery elm bark. When the bag boy looked at him like he was crazy, Rob decided to have a bit of fun, and asked him on what aisle the stinging nettles were located. The bag boy just shook his head at the ridiculous start to his day. Rob called for foxglove tea after him, saying that was kind of normal, wasn't it? He got no answer. He had a bit of a chuckle before heading back to his car to wait for the health food store. Hopefully they would have what he needed. They sounded like earthy products. He didn't want to, but he was willing to ask where an occult store was. He hoped he would be able to ask someone remotely cool. The bag boy hadn't been his last hope, but the next person might be. He figured he could just ask to see a phone book and get an address himself. The health food store opened about an hour later. Rob strolled in. It was enormous. The aisles were taller than he could reach and ran up and down the length of the large building. Rob wondered how they could stay in business in a small-town area with huge overhead like that. He decided to consider the gift horse and the mouth. What did he care about that, really? It was there. He found the herbal tea section and had to go through its agonizingly numerous sections, but he found it. Foxglove tea. There was a purple flower on the front of the box. There was also a very large yellow label on it with red letters warning pregnant women not to drink it. It also had warnings of the following side effects: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, wild hallucinations, delirium, and severe headache. That was less than encouraging, but what he was about to do was pretty extreme. He would deal. He went to the spice section to look for the ground ivy. After going through the section a few times to make sure he hadn't missed it, he decided he would ask the cashier where it was. First, he would try to look for the other items himself. He was in a town where he didn't know anyone, but he didn't want to appear to be a weirdo, even in a hippie store, just in case he needed some advice. He tackled the stinging nettles next. He remembered that he had seen something like that back in the herbal tea section. He went back to be sure. He was right. There was stinging nettles tea. He hoped that was the proper form for it to be in. The book hadn't specified that it could also be had as a tea. It was all to be ingested. In one form or another, it was all going to end up in the same place, and in the same way. He picked up its box. It was off-white with a picture of some plant on it. It had a warning in a purple square. It said that stinging nettles do just that. They sting. The burning lasts about an hour in most individuals, but can last for up to 12 hours. Terrific, Rob whispered sarcastically to himself. He wondered why the store was selling such poisons. Then he stopped himself and thought of the gift horse again. Next he went for the powdered slippery elm bark. He looked for an aisle with a powdered section. He could not find it. He was beaten. He would have to look like a fool and ask for help with the New Age items. The cashier was a pretty dark-skinned girl. She looked to be about his age. Her dyed blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She was sitting on a stool and reading a book through her glasses. He tried to see what the book was, but she had it opened almost flat so he could not see what it was. It could have been a good icebreaker. When he approached her, he noticed her nose ring. That made him feel more relaxed. He cleared his throat. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "Yes. This might sound weird, but I'm looking for—" He glanced down at his paper. "Powdered, slippery elm bark and ground ivy? That doesn't sound weird. You can find the elm bark in the medicinal mixtures area." "And the ground ivy? I looked through the spice section, but I can't find any ground-up ivy." "I don't want to know what that would even taste like," she laughed. "What? You're right, that does sound weird." Rob's cheeks flushed. He was embarrassed in front of this pretty hot girl. "It's not ground up, it's found on the ground. Hence the name ground ivy. It's in the gardening section. Come on, I'll show you." "Thanks," he said, feeling foolish. She took him to the medicinal section and quickly grabbed up a bag of powdered slippery elm bark. Before Rob could get a look, out of curiosity, at what else they had in that area, she grabbed him by the arm and guided him to the gardening area. It was outside past a pair of automatic doors. There was practically a field of potted plants out there. It would have taken Rob forever to go through it. She walked right up to an area of potted plants that really didn't look that much different from any of the others, and handed him a good-sized pot. It was labeled ground ivy. He was relieved. His search was over. The pretty cashier was bent over as she was ringing Rob up. He noticed her cleavage. He gulped and cleared his throat. He complimented her on her Susie and the Banshees shirt. She thanked him and said that she herself was so goth that even her skin was black. She laughed at her own joke. Rob laughed too. She told him about a party at a friend's house that she was going to that night, even though she really didn't want to. She asked if he would like to join her. He would have loved to, but he had to say no. He had other plans already. She looked disappointed, but then perked up and said that she worked at the register Monday through Friday, and that he should come back by sometime. He said that he was sure he would. He wasn't, though. Not at all. He left and went to the car with the supplies. The back seat was already loaded with all the other stuff. He let the potted plant ride shotgun, so he could grab it if he braked too hard, and it started to slide to the floor. The ingredients were crucial. He didn't want one of them to dump out all over the dirty floor of the car, and then have to be scooped up in his hands. Something as sacrilegious as that might not let an ingredient work as it should. He would be respectful. He really hoped he hadn't fucked up by getting the nettles in tea form. Maybe that should be in a pot as well. It should be fine, he told himself again. He would not go back in there and face the prospect of what he could, but could not have. He assured himself that he was ready to go and begin the ritual. He headed back to the gas station. He realized he needed one more thing, a map of the area. It seemed ludicrous, but he needed to plan on where he was going to get lost. He didn't want to think he was in the middle of nowhere and have the killer hone in on him and come from a Holiday Inn nearby that had just been concealed by a thin wall of trees. He had to plan on where to lose himself. Rob had gotten the map and made his decision. He would go to the petrified forest in Calistoga, just outside of Santa Rosa. It was perfect, and it was relatively nearby. It would be easy enough to stay hidden for a while in an entire forest, yet it was distinct enough for him to be able to eventually be found, with such physically distinct landmarks like petrified trees. He got back on I-5 and continued south. After about an hour and a half, he exited onto the 20 freeway and headed west. He followed the map's indications to follow it around the curve and go on south again. In a short while, that didn't feel short with all the anticipation, he came upon the very cleverly named Petrified Forest Road. He turned onto it. There was only one way to go on it, since it ended when it met up with the 20 freeway. He proceeded down it, feeling the unpaved road rock the car underneath him. It was almost soothing at the slow and steady speed he was going. After another brief but lengthily felt stretch of time, Rob came upon the entrance to the forest. A large sign in the shape of an open book greeted him. He was relieved. He expected to find it guarded by park rangers who would keep track of who was in the forest and for how long. No one was there. There was only the sign. It read, "A sight to behold. In this forest are the largest petrified trees in the world. Here, turned to stone, are gigantic redwoods, as large as 105 feet in length and varied in diameter. Glowing with beauty in the petrified wood are rich deposits of minerals, crystal, wood opal, obsidian, silica, and others." On the opposite page of the open book sign, the informative welcome read on, with its painted-on, typed-looking letters. "Out of trees of stone grow oaks and firs, and from the ancient volcanic ash, which forms a sanctuary for the forest, spring living trees, including white, black, and live oak fir trees, 100-year-old red-barked manzanita, toyon, laurel, madrone, and chaparral. Since 1871, the quiet beauties of this forest have attracted scientists, students, and tourists from all over the world." "And at least 2 demon mutant freaks," Rob uttered under his breath. He would make sure that he would bring a guest, one who was very much invited. He felt himself almost looking forward to having another interaction. There was the feeling that it would be the final one way or the other, and there was a sense of relief in that. He had to regain the mindset that he would win. He had to believe in that. He couldn't just look forward to any ending. His own death would be too easy an outcome. He took a deep breath and psyched himself up into feeling empowered and able. If he allowed himself to keep even an inkling of the possibility that he could lose somewhere way in the back of his mind, then it was all the more likely to go down that way. That would be terrible for him, and for everyone after him. He had to win. He would. Even if he knew of the chance to lose, he would not believe it. It worked. He felt confident again. He didn't see any signs saying that there were any hours for the forest. He assumed they would be sunrise to sunset, but he planned to stay overnight. There were no posted guidelines for campers. He didn't see anyone else around. He was totally unsupervised. He hoped it would stay that way until he needed attention. He went past the book sign and onto the scenic driving trail for visitors. It was beautiful. The hot afternoon sun lit it all up. There were massive tree trunks that made him feel like the size of a pea, but even in his dwarfed-feeling state of awe, he kept his sense of power. He felt like he was in a fairy tale, and was almost waiting for the trunks to start moving and reveal that they were the legs of giants. They would be giants that he could best. He would be David to their Goliath, or Jack to their giant ogre above the beanstalk. There was a younger, regular forest mixed in with the ancient fairy tale forest of bigger-than-life trunks and treetops that disappeared above the canopy of the normal forest. There were petrified trees on their sides that looked like the skeleton of some monstrous serpents. The huge, broken sections of trunk looked like vertebrae. The limbs and branches looked like collapsed ribs. It was a very distinct place, as he hoped it would be. It was perfect in person as well as idea. He would be found there. It was time to get lost first. He didn't want to risk being seen after being granted the gift of unlikely solitude in the middle of the day at an attraction. He found it hard to believe that all the scientists, tourists, and students had all happened not to be there on the same day at the same time. He would not be unappreciative of the opportunity. There was no time for sightseeing. He had business to attend to. He looked for a place to ditch the car, but he could not find anywhere it would not be obvious. He was through the driving tour, and on into some more heavily wooded area. The road was becoming more unstable beneath him, and was losing its novelty with every jarring jolt and pothole. There was no luck finding a place to hide the auto. He thought about putting it just off-road, and covering it with tree branches, but that seemed ridiculous and not very thorough. It would be found, and then it would be even more suspicious. Suddenly the answer appeared before him. There was a parking area of all things. There were several other cars already parked there, and a couple of RVs as well. The solution became obvious. He would hide it in plain sight.